A society. When I traveled into that cold land, I expected the KISLEVites to be dour and miserable. Lady knows, I arrived after a month of snow, but everywhere I traveled, I encountered life and humor. Dark humor, it has to be said. But what else could flourish in a country so wracked with woe as KISLEV? From Florian Barthold, a Bretonnian gilder. KISLEV is a country forged from various warring invaders who finally settled alongside each other. The bulk of the nation's population is mostly made up of two tribal people, the Ungols of the north and the Gospodars of the south, while the remaining population consists of the Norse and the last remnants of the Ropsmen people. Tribes such as the Dolgan have migrated from the eastern steppes and made their new homes in KISLEV's northern borders, while many of the people that inhabit the south display many traits of the Empire, as it is common for people in this region to interact and mingle the bloodlines. In fact, KISLEV is almost two nations in one. On the one hand, there are the more civilized peoples of the south and the cities, where the lands are relatively fertile, and in the north, particularly north of the river Linsk, there are wild nomadic tribes. During the time of Sigma, the harsh lands northeast of the river Urskoy were populated by the Ungol tribes, who also dominated the smaller tribes of the Ropsmen who lived in what is now Troll country. Sharing many traits with the Kurgan steppe nomads to the east, the Ungols were a scattered people consisting of nomadic horse-riding tribesmen. Sigmar's influence did not stretch this far north, and they remained independent yet in friendly terms from the confederation of tribes founded by Sigmar. From the eastern steppes, and of particular importance, was the arrival of the powerful and wealthy Gospodars. Torn with strife, the Empire was in no position to contest these lands, and the superior arms and tactics of the Gospodars drove the Ungols to the west and north, who in turn absorbed the Ropsmen completely. Over the following century, the power of the Gospodars grew, and the city of KISLEV was founded. The settlement of Prague grew in size as the Gospodars used the Linsk to launch incursions into Ungol territory, eventually forcing the Ungols to accept Gospodar rule, who are now beginning to be called KISLEVites after their capital city. By this time, the former Ungol city of Erengrad had grown into a busy port ruled by the new KISLEVites, and from here the KISLEVites were able to sail the Sea of Claws, trading and fighting with the Norse and on occasion the Empire, as well as keeping the Ungols in check. This state of affairs had existed for over 750 years, and by this time Gospodar and Ungol society had blended over the centuries, to a greater or lesser extent, into the nation of KISLEV today. The ruling elite from whom the Tsars and Tsarinas hail are of Gospodar heritage. The influence of the Gospodar language and beliefs is more evident in the south, particularly in the cities of KISLEV and Erengrad, while further north the land becomes more barren, and the horse tribe still holds sway. In fact, Prague has been reclaimed in a large part by the old Ungol nobility, and in many ways is a separate power in the north. Though there still is much bad blood between the two people, they are nevertheless united under their hatred of the marauders that prey on them from the far north. This has also led to a blending of culture and customs. Ungol Law. In some areas of KISLEV, generally remote parts of the oblast, Ungol Law still applies. Tsar Boris made this concession, which won him the support of a large number of Ungol warriors, but Katarine would like to undo it. She would prefer Gospodar Law, with her at the head, to apply everywhere. However, she has to respect the edicts of her father, and so she works within Ungol Law in those areas. The inhabitants of any place can petition for their home to be transferred to Gospodar Law, and Katarine grants any such petition that has substantial support. Changes in the other direction are not permitted. Ungol Law is not written down anywhere authoritative. Rather, it is remembered by the judges and the wise women and applied according to common sense. It is unwise to argue the details of the definition of a crime in an Ungol court. The laws contain the normal kinds of prohibitions against theft and violence, but also have a number of provisions based on life on the steppes. Refusing hospitality is a serious offense, only a little below murder. Some allowance is made for the circumstances, but turning someone away from your camp is always a criminal matter. The basic rule is that more permanent settlements must offer hospitality, and that, if both groups are equally nomadic, the responsibility falls on the larger. Abusing hospitality is an even more serious offense than murder, and some judges argue that it is the most serious offense possible. It is one of the few cases in which a judge might order innocent members of the criminal's group to be punished as well. However, the most important mark of gravity is that the Ungol put a lot of effort into finding and punishing those who commit this crime, in some cases spending years on the hunt. For example, one Chilean follower of Ronald was finally slain by a half-dozen travel-worn Ungol warriors on the streets of Sartosa. Hospitality does not, of course, extend to followers of the ruiner's powers, and refusing hospitality to them or abusing their trust is perfectly legal. Ungol Responsibility. The fundamental concept of Ungol Law is that a group is responsible for the actions of all its members. If a member of a group commits a crime, any member of the group may be punished for that crime. The smallest such group is the family, defined as all the blood descendants of a living woman and the husbands of any married women in that bloodline. Men change families when they get married. Families split into groups defined by blood descendants of a matriarch's daughter when she dies. Ungol Law has nothing to say about actions taken within a family, and the elders discipline as they see fit. In most cases, however, the harsh environment ensures families pull together. It is normal for a family to travel together or live in the same place, and while individual members may leave, it is unheard of for a family to be split between two stanitsas. Above the families comes the clans and tribes, as well as the stanitsas. Both clans and tribes were originally defined by blood links, but over the centuries they have simply become traditional groupings. It is unusual, but not unheard of, for a family to change clan or tribe, though an individual woman must belong to the clan and tribe chosen by her family. It is not uncommon for men on marriage to change both clan and tribe as well as family. Stanitsas are places of residence, typically villages, and often host a number of families and even different clans or tribes. If a crime is committed against an individual, the penalty can be levied on any individual who shares membership with the criminal in a group to which the victim does not belong. Thus, if both criminal and victim are in the same family, there is no possible group to take the penalty. If they are in different families within the same clan, a member of the criminal's family must be punished. If they are in different clans, anyone in the same clan may be taken. The law states that the actual criminal is the preferred target of punishment, and the judge grants the criminal's group a period of time to produce the malefactor for punishment. This deadline is normally at least a week, occasionally as long as a year. The length depends in large part on how important the criminal's group is. Gospodars are, for the purposes of Ungol Law, considered to be one entire family. Sounds fair. That means any crime committed by a Gospodar against an Ungol may be avenged on any other Gospodar. This part of Ungol Law is something Katarin thoroughly dislikes. No shit. In response, she has established a group of Gospodars who track down the real criminals and take the punishment if they fail. These stelniks, as they are called, are often convicted criminals given a chance to work off their penalty. They often follow the bounty hunter career. KISLEVites are considered to be a single group, and all foreigners are treated as a single family. This generalization has led to an innocent Italian merchant being executed for a murder committed by a mercenary from Stirland, and Katarin would like to find some foreign volunteers to play the same role as the Stelniks. So far, however, they have been in short supply, particularly as judges have been known to give foreigners only until sunset to find the true criminal. Ungol Court. Ungol Law courts consist of a single judge who listens to the evidence, asks questions as he wishes, and then makes a decision. There is no appeal. The only rule is that the judge must not belong to the same group as either the victim or the accused. Thus, a judge between two families must be from a third family, which means that a judge between Gospodar and Ungol must be a foreigner, though the Ungol tribes have agreed the Tsarina in person can also serve as judge in such a case. When judging between a KISLEVite and a foreigner, there is no neutral group, so any judge can serve. As a result, foreigners rarely win their cases. Although the formal requirements are simple, most judges are chosen based on their experience and reputation for fairness. In principle, the two parties to a case can choose anyone qualified whom they agree on, and in the past, things worked that way. Now, the Tsarina requires any judge have her approval. So groups choose judges in advance and send the names to the court in KISLEV for official recognition. Such methods are often unwieldy and take up far too much of the Tsarina's time. So she delegates the minor appointments to her representatives, usually ice witches. Most judges are elected, though some areas have different customs, such as always appointing the oldest living man or someone who was crippled, fighting against raiders from the north. In almost every case, the ataman of a stanitsa is also a judge, though he is never the only judge present. Foreign judges are chosen based on their actions, and their names are sent to KISLEV in the normal way. Witch hunters from the Empire are chosen quite frequently, as they often impress the Ungols with their commitment to hunting down foul cultists. They also have no objection to handing out harsh sentences and are willing to travel the oblast to reach the cases. Katarin has recently refused an application to appoint a particular witch hunter as a judge, and he proved to be a secret cultist of the Plague Lord, so this has strengthened her hand somewhat. The judge decides what evidence to hear, and the verdict is at his sole discretion, as is the penalty. For the most part, this process works well enough and provides something close to justice quickly enough to allow life to continue on the unforgiving steps. If a judge becomes corrupt, or worse, seduced by the ruiner's powers, it can be disastrous. Ungol Punishment. The Ungol do not use fines as punishments, though they may require compensation to be paid to the victims. Similarly, they do not use imprisonment as a punishment, but criminals may be held while they await trial. Suspects are normally held by their own family, rather than by their accusers, in order to ensure the right person suffers if the decision goes against them. As a result, Ungol punishments are almost entirely corporal. Flogging and branding are popular, and the number of lashes or the size of the brand depends on the nature of the crime. Crippling is only employed when a whole group is held to bear some responsibility for a crime, as a crippled member becomes a burden on the group. Indeed, it is not uncommon for a crippled criminal to be killed by his family, an action outside Ungol law. However, minor mutilations which do not affect a person's ability to survive are used in much the same way as brands. Finally, capital punishment is common. The following specific punishments are popular in Ungol areas, but most judges have their own favorite. Punishment by arrows. The criminal is tied to a post, and archers shoot arrows at him. The number of arrows and the distance between the archer and the post are determined by the judge. This punishment can be anything from a death penalty to a light slap on the wrist. In almost all cases, the victim is allowed to nominate an archer. The Ballad of Isukin and Noga includes a famous scene in which Noga shoots 20 arrows at Isukin, who was convicted of betraying Noga, from 5 paces and misses every time. In the ballad, this act is the start of an alliance that overthrows a horde of Kurgan. Satirical versions in which Isukin kills Noga as soon as he is untied are almost more popular than the original ballad. Punishment by the glove. A metal glove that opens like a clam shell is heated until it glows and then is closed on the criminal's hand. It is left closed for a number of heartbeats depending on the severity of the crime and then removed. Punishment by the helm. A closed helmet is heated until it glows and then is forced onto the criminal's head. This punishment is a form of execution, and if the judge is feeling merciful, the helmet is riveted to the base of the skull with a long spike, causing near instant death and sparing the criminal considerable pain. Punishment by horse running. The criminal is tied to a rope, which is tied to the saddle of a horse. The horse is then set into motion. Many variations of this punishment exist, allowing it to be tuned to the crime. The length of the horse's run can be controlled, as can its speed. Similarly, the length of the rope and the means by which it is fastened to the criminal make a difference. A rope tied around the waist allows the criminal to run as fast as he can. One tied around the wrists makes him more likely to fall, while one tied around the ankles guarantees that he will be dragged. Further, the horse might be ridden or simply driven into a gallop out onto the oblast. Leaving the horse to its own devices means the final level of the penalty is in the hands of the guards, something appealing to some judges. Punishment by Spirit's mercy. The criminal is driven out into the oblast, branded on his face with a mark indicating that it is a legal duty to deny him hospitality. This act is basically a death sentence, and in most cases, the criminal is driven out naked and with no possessions, which guarantees a swift death. However, in some cases, the criminal is allowed full equipment, particularly if his family is very popular or if the judge feels he was justified in his actions. It is still essentially a death sentence, but a few people manage to survive alone on the steps. Suran the Dead is a legendary example. Though his exploits in support of his family and against the raiders from the north have been exaggerated in the telling.
And now, onto the Gospodar Law.
Gospodar Law is more like that of the Empire, and has been strongly influenced by it. Some KISLEVites feel there has been too much influence and long for a return to the good old days of proper Gospodar justice. The Tsarina, however, likes the centralized system, so no change is likely any time soon. The biggest difference from Ungol Law is that the responsibility for a crime rests solely with the criminal. Gospodar Courts cannot flog someone just because his cousin is a thief. Nearly as significant is the fact that Gospodar Law is written and defined by the wording of the Tsarina's proclamations. The judges must make decisions in accordance with this written law, and thus must study it before they can be entrusted with a court. Although the written law exists, it is simple compared to the laws of the Empire, and leaves a lot of room for judicial interpretation. Gospodar laws naturally have the standard sorts of laws against theft and violence, but the laws also contain a number that are more specific to the land of KISLEV. It is illegal for adult males to not have, maintain, and practice with appropriate weapons. For most of the country, this law is irrelevant, as there are far more pressing reasons to be ready to fight. However, in the cities, there are some who want to get around the law, and the judges and Chekistes worry about the possibility of armed vagabonds rioting when they realize they cannot be stopped. Before the
Storm of chaos,
the pressure to change the law was strong, but the reminder of just how much of a threat the raiders from the north are has undermined this position for now. It is important to note, women are permitted to wield weapons. It is merely not a legal obligation for them. The importance of Ursun to the culture is reflected in the laws. Most notably, it is illegal to kill a hibernating bear, and there is a general consensus that the most serious penalties are appropriate for such an offense. A number of laws concern the proper respect being shown to the nobility, and especially to the Tsarina. It is a criminal offense to criticize the Tsarina in any way or to undermine respect for her rule. This law is enforced harshly against boyars, atamans, and others in positions of authority, but much more loosely against ordinary citizens. This law was decreed by the Tsarina directly. Any sign of dissent or disloyalty among the people with the power to disturb her rule must be wiped out immediately. But low-level murmurings and jokes among the ordinary people can be tolerated. Of course, serious suggestions that the Tsarina should be replaced are dealt with harshly no matter what the rank of the offender. The laws for the nobility are enforced more strictly against the ordinary people. Criticism is not illegal, but disrespect is. Peasants are required to give way to nobles, to always speak politely to nobles, and to change their actions if what they are doing is inconvenient for a noble. Some boyars press cases for violations of these rules with great vigor, particularly in the cities. The country nobility tend to be a little more tolerant, as there are fewer people to back them up if the peasants come to hate them. One result of the enforcement of these laws is that the common people tend to see the Tsarina as far more sympathetic towards them than she is toward the lower nobility. While a petty noble might drag a shopkeeper to court for not bowing low enough, the Tsarina overlooks drunken conversations about taxes being too high, even when the Chekist is present. This is the reason why the common folk have such great affection for the Tsarina, and while Catherine may not have planned for this consequence, she is certainly taking steps to maintain it. Gospodar Law does not contain any requirements to offer hospitality, but it does contain laws punishing abuse of hospitality. These laws state a host should be treated as a member of the nobility by his guests. As a result, very few people in the cities ask for hospitality from people they are not already friendly with. Out on the oblast, customs of hospitality are very strong, and abuse, while rare, is punished with the full force of the law.
Gospodar Feuds.
Gospodar Law permits feuds between families, possibly under the influence of Ungol Law. The law allows an individual or an individual's family to take revenge for an injury suffered. The person receiving the injury need not be the guilty party. It is, of course, also permissible to take revenge for the injury inflicted in revenge. The legal mechanism to bring feuds under control is the law that it is not permissible to take revenge for a reasonable injury inflicted as punishment for a crime recognized in a court of law. If the punishment is unreasonable, however, this rule does not apply. Taking revenge for a reasonable punishment is, however, regarded more seriously than inflicting the original injury. The Tsarina would dearly like to abolish the law on feuds, as it undermines her authority. However, too many nobles still see it as essential to their dealings with each other, and she is not strong enough to force them to give up their feuds. She prefers the current situation to having the nobility defy her authority, so it remains, for now. The law that allows courts to bring feuds to an end is having an effect, as slightly weaker parties are tending to bring issues to court rather than continue the feud on their own. The Tsarina has instructed her agents, particularly the Chekist, to be particularly vigilant about groups who do not respect the decisions of the courts.
The Gospodar Courts.
Gospodar Courts are run by professional or semi-professional appointees of the Tsarina. In remote areas, the ataman of the settlement almost invariably holds this position. But in the cities, the magistrates are increasingly becoming a professional group separate from the nobility. Catherine encourages this trend, and a few of the powerful nobles can see the threat it poses to their power. They do not, however, typically want to take on such a dull job, which means that Katarin's plan is proceeding well. Most courts have a single judge, though those set up to judge boyars or higher members of the nobility have 3 judges who must agree unanimously in order to convict. KISLEV and Ehrengrad each have a single permanent court for the nobility, while Prague has 2, a reminder of the unrest among the northern boyars. The judge decides who speaks, what other evidence can be admitted, and whether the accused is guilty. There is no appeal, but a judge who issues a decision that contradicts the law can be tried for treason. Even if the judge is found to have broken the law, the judgment against the person convicted still stands. The penalty is determined by the victim or the victim's family. The law sets out a list of permissible penalties, but they are not distinguished by offense. A victim can choose to have a verbal insult be punished by
slowly torturing the criminal to death.
And that penalty is enforced. The main check on this is the possibility of a feud, as discussed before. Of course, when the victim is powerful and the criminal is not, it's not really an issue. Boyars often inflict draconian penalties on peasants. Outside the settlements, law is enforced by oblast justices. These judges are as much police as judge, and they bear many resemblances to the bounty hunters of the empire. Unlike city judges, they are also permitted to impose penalties, though some take pride in dragging criminals before the victims for punishment. If a settlement is without a judge, which is rare, or has a complaint against the ataman, which is more common, its members may appeal to the oblast justices. The need for oblast justices is assessed on the apparent level of crime in a region, meaning if things appear to be calm, the residents are reluctant to stir things up too much by undertaking detailed investigations. On the other hand, if there is an obvious problem, many try to scare it back into the shadows. For tales of close links between oblast justices and local crime syndicates are common. The Chekists spend some of their time looking for such corruption.
And at last, Gospodar Punishment.
As noted under Gospodar Law, any legal punishment may be meted out for any crime at the victim's discretion under the feud provision. Punishments tend to be harsh, but very few victims go against the social sense of what is reasonable, and those who do are often ostracized, even if they are not targeted by a feud. Of course, nobles feel that harsh punishments are entirely appropriate when a peasant assaults a noble, and they do not care if peasants want to ostracize them. Fines of any amount are a permitted punishment. Half of the fine goes to the court, and thus to the Tsarina, while the other half is kept by the victim. Fines of a bit more than twice the cost of any damage are universally recognized as reasonable, and victims of theft who restrict themselves to such punishments can get a reputation for justice and mercy, even as they vigorously pursue anyone who wrongs them. It is common for victims to require a fine in addition to any other punishment, flogging up to 100 strokes with implements ranging from a light cane to heavy leather straps loaded with weights and spikes is another popular penalty. The most popular form of legal discussion in taverns is of the appropriate level of flogging for hypothetical offences. Branding is not permitted under Gospodar Law. It used to be, but it was abolished after a series of petty thieves were branded rapist or cultist of the North. Mutilation is generally only applied in cases of wounding, where it is common for the same injury to be inflicted on the criminal. Nobles can often get away with imposing injuries that correspond to damage done to their property. An urchin who broke the windows of a noble's house might be blinded, for example. The death penalty is also available, but rarely used by the common folk for anything short of rape or murder. Nobles use it more loosely and commonly impose it for the death of valued animals.
The end.